You know, usually when we talk about going through a season of scarcity, there is this deeply ingrained human instinct to find a logical, practical way out.
Right, yeah. We want to fix it.
Exactly. It's just what we do. We look at our resources, we open up the spreadsheets, we calculate our savings, we physically measure what is left in the pantry, and we try to engineer our own survival.
Because it's natural. I mean, we like things to be manageable.
Too. We desperately want to be able to see the bottom of the problem and then build the bridge that is going to carry us over it. But then you step into the biblical narrative, specifically when you step into the profound reality of how God provides, suddenly that whole human calculation is just completely shattered. We find ourselves looking at a spiritual landscape that demands an entirely different kind of sight.
It forces us to use a different set of muscles entirely, doesn't it?
It really does.
I mean, it is the absolute definition of coming to the end of yourself.
Yeah.
And let's be honest, that is a deeply unsettling place for us to be.
Uh.
We're modern people. We like our safety nets.
Oh, absolutely.
Being at the end of yourself forces you to confront your total lack of control over your own life, your circumstances, and, well, your own future.
And that's exactly where we're going today. Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we are looking at a dusty, desperate encounter found in 1 Kings chapter 17 that completely upends how we calculate our survival.
I'm really looking forward to this one.
Me too. We're going to be walking slowly and respectfully through an incredibly insightful biblical essay titled The Widow of Zarephath, Grace Flows Freely, and that was written by Brother Woody Brum.
It's such a rich essay.
It is.
All right.
And I want to speak directly to you, the listener, right at the top here. Because you might be facing your own empty jar moment right now.
Yeah, that season of profound scarcity.
Right. Maybe it's a financial crisis that's keeping you up at 3 in the morning. Maybe it's a terrifying medical report. Or perhaps it's just a deep, agonizing season of emotional exhaustion.
Just total uncertainty.
Exactly. And we're approaching this today not as some dry academic exercise, but as a practical, deeply encouraging anchor for your everyday life decisions.
Because the text we're looking at, it really is a theological masterclass in how grace operates, right?
That's a great way to put it, yes.
It just challenges everything we assume about who God is and what it truly means to trust Him when every single earthly indicator is screaming that ruin is inevitable.
So let's jump right into the context, because to really understand the sheer shock of what happens in 1 Kings 17, we have to understand the absolute darkness of the historical moment.
Set the scene for us.
Okay, so we are placing ourselves in the mid-9th century BC, and the spiritual climate in the northern kingdom of Israel is, well, it's catastrophic.
Catastrophic really is the right word for it.
Israel is groaning under the weight of a profoundly wicked administration. You have King Ahab on the throne, and the text in 1 Kings 16 tells us he has married a foreign princess named Jezebel.
Right, the daughter of the king of the Sidonians.
Exactly. And the essay makes it clear, we have to understand this wasn't just some political treaty sealed with a wedding. Jezebel brought a spiritual plague upon the covenant nation.
She didn't just quietly practice her own religion in the private wing of the palace, did she?
No, not at all. She actively, aggressively imported the worship of Baal directly into the heart of Israel. The essay points out she was literally weaponizing her religion.
Wow.
She was building massive temples, using state funds to support hundreds of false prophets, and systematically trying to eradicate the worship of Yahweh. She was literally hunting down the Lord's prophets.
That is just incredibly dark, but I want to pause on Baal for a second, if we can.
Yeah, let's do it.
Because we hear that name tossed around in Sunday school, but who actually was Baal to the people living in the ancient Near East? Like, why was this specific idol so culturally powerful?
That's a crucial question, because he wasn't just a generic carved piece of wood to them. In the surrounding pagan cultures, Baal was universally revered as the great rider of the clouds.
The rider of the clouds, okay.
He was the storm god. He was the specific deity believed to be responsible for sending rain, for ensuring the crops grew, and ultimately for sustaining the entire agricultural economy.
So in an agrarian society, I mean, the storm god basically holds your life in his hands.
Absolutely. The cultural belief was absolute. If you wanted food on your table, if you wanted your children to survive the winter, you had to appease Baal.
Okay, so the people of Israel are essentially being indoctrinated into believing that their very survival depends on this Canaanite storm god.
Yes, which makes the opening verse of 1 Kings 17 so explosive. The God of Israel steps in, and through his prophet Elijah, declares a sudden, absolute drought across the entire region.
Just out of nowhere.
Right. Elijah says, there will be neither dew nor rain in the next few years except at my word. And when you read the essay's breakdown of that, it hits you. This isn't just God sending a natural disaster to punish bad behavior.
It's a targeted assault.
It is a targeted theological assault. It is a direct challenge to the supposed jurisdiction of Baal. Yahweh is effectively walking onto Baal's home turf and shutting up the heavens.
To prove the utter powerlessness of this false god.
Exactly. The entire nation is waiting for Baal to bring the rain, and the God of Abraham is saying, the sky is closed until I say otherwise.
Wow. He's demonstrating that he alone controls the rain, the harvest, and life itself.
Right. Baal is a myth. Yahweh is the sovereign creator. So it is right in the middle of this severe region-wide judgment that we find the prophet Elijah.
The messenger of the bad news.
Yeah, he delivers this devastating message, and then he immediately becomes a hunted man. Jezebel wants him dead.
Right.
He's weary, he's a fugitive, and God sends him to hide in the Kerith ravine. He's being miraculously fed by ravens, drinking from the brook. But then, well, the drought does what droughts do.
The brook dries up.
The brook dries up, the provision stops, and God gives him a directive that, from a purely human perspective, is completely unhinged.
Right. In 1 Kings 17.9, God commands Elijah, go at once to Zarephath in the region of Sidon and stay there. I have directed a widow there to supply you with food.
I have to stop here because the geography of this is staggering. Zarephath. God tells him to go to Zarephath in Sidon.
It's the absolute epicenter of Jezebel's homeland, isn't it?
Yes. Zarephath is nestled directly between the powerful, wealthy, coastal cities of Tyre and Sidon. This is the heartland of Baal worship. This is where Jezebel's father rules.
So God is intentionally bypassing the borders of Israel. He's bypassing any wealthy, sympathetic Israelites who might be secretly holding onto their faith.
Exactly. And he is marching his premier prophet straight into the enemy's stronghold. It makes zero sense strategically.
Yeah, from a military or logical standpoint, it's absurd.
It really is. I was trying to think of how to picture this, and it's like a king taking his top, most visible, most wanted general, stripping him of all his weapons, and sending him directly into the capital city of a hostile, warring empire.
And not just sending him there, but telling him, oh, by the way, you're going to rely on the most destitute, vulnerable civilian in that enemy capital for your survival.
Exactly. Because God doesn't send Elijah to a sympathetic merchant who has a secret cellar full of grain. He sends him to a widow.
And we really have to strip away our modern understanding of social safety nets to grasp what being a widow meant in the ancient Near East.
Right. Explain that context a bit for us.
Well, a widow was the picture of profound vulnerability. Without a husband, a woman had no legal protection. She had no steady income. She had no property rights.
So she couldn't just go out and apply for a job or get government assistance?
No, not at all. She and her children were often reduced to absolute destitution, entirely reliant on the fragile, often inconsistent charity of their local community.
But the famine had crossed the border. This wasn't just hitting Israel. It was devastating the local economy in Sidon, too.
Exactly. So the community in Zarephath had no charity left to give.
Which means this particular widow isn't just poor. She is living on the ragged edge of starvation. And that brings up a really honest question. It's something I think anyone studying this has to wrestle with.
What's that?
Why would God choose her? I mean, why use someone on the very brink of death entirely without human remedy to sustain his prophet? Why not someone with at least a little bit of margin?
Because margin allows us to share the glory, doesn't it?
Ooh, that's good. Say more about that.
So margin allows us to say, well, God helped, but, I also had a little savings, or I was pretty resourceful. The essay brings out that God intentionally chooses a situation of total human impossibility to showcase his supreme authority.
So he brings his prophet to a place where there is absolutely no earthly safety net.
Right. No human backup plan and no logical way out. He does this so that when the provision finally comes, it is undeniably exclusively from the hand of the Creator. And it also sends a profound theological message. His power to provide is not limited to the Promised Land. His jurisdiction extends deep into the darkest, most hostile pagan territories on earth.
That is beautiful. Okay, so let's bring this down to the actual dusty reality of that town gate. Elijah makes this incredibly dangerous journey. He's walking miles and miles through a scorched landscape.
He's got to be completely exhausted.
He is. He arrives in Zarephath. He's parched. His lips are probably cracked. And the very first person he spots is this widow gathering sticks.
And he calls out to her.
He does. He asks for a small cup of water to drink.
Which, honestly, in the middle of a historic drought, is a massive request. Water is the most precious commodity imaginable at this moment.
Yeah, you wouldn't just hand that out to a stranger lightly.
Exactly. Yet, her response is remarkable. She doesn't ignore him or hoard what she has. She graciously turns to fetch it. I think that demonstrates a profound hospitality in her character right away.
It does, but then comes the moment that genuinely stops me in my tracks when I read this passage. It's the shattering request. As she is turning to leave to get the water, Elijah calls out a second, far more demanding request.
Yeah?
He says, "And bring me, please, a piece of bread." That's 1 Kings 17:11. And this simple sentence, it completely breaks her. It shatters her stoic resolve.
It's the breaking point, because it forces her to articulate the horrifying reality of her situation out loud. She responds with a solemn oath.
She says, "As surely as the Lord your God lives."
Right. Now notice she says the Lord your God. She recognizes he's an Israelite, a prophet of Yahweh, but she swears by his life that she possesses no bread whatsoever.
She gives him the raw, agonizing truth. She says she has only a handful of flour in a jar and a tiny drop of olive oil in a jug.
Just fumes, basically.
Literally. And she explains that she was just gathering a few sticks to take home and prepare one final meager meal for herself and her son. And then she delivers probably the most heartbreaking line in the Old Testament, that we may eat it and die.
She is staring directly into the abyss. She has done the math. The jar is empty. The jug is dry.
Yeah.
She possesses absolutely no resources to change her fate. She knows she cannot save herself, and far more agonizingly for a mother, she knows she cannot save the life of her child.
This is the absolute end of the line. But I have to push back on this scene, or at least voice what I think any thoughtful person feels reading this.
Yeah, please do.
Sitting with the human reality of this moment is agonizing. To a starving mother who is preparing her dying child's last meal, asking her to give that food to a stranger sounds terrifyingly audacious.
It really does.
Honestly, to human ears it sounds abusive, it sounds cruel. How do we reconcile this intense human impossibility, this raw maternal grief, with the loving character of God? I mean, why put her through that intense of a test?
I completely understand that tension. I struggled with it too. It does sound cruel if we only look at the request in isolation. But we reconcile it by looking very closely at what Elijah does and says next in the narrative.
He doesn't offer her empty, generic optimism, you know? He doesn't pat her on the shoulder and say, "Oh, cheer up, I'm sure it'll rain tomorrow."
Right.
He speaks directly into the center of her deepest terror. The very first thing he says is, "Do not be afraid." But he doesn't stop there. He commands her to go home and do as she has said to prepare the meal, but he tells her to first make a small loaf of bread for him and then make something for herself and her son.
But he still demands to be served first. I mean, that's the part that still catches in my throat.
He does.
Yeah.
But the key, the absolute hinge of this entire narrative that the essay points out is that Elijah immediately anchors this incredibly difficult, painful command to a specific divine promise.
He declares the word of the God of Israel over her situation.
Yes. In verse 14, he guarantees her, "For this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. The jar of flour will not be used up, and the jug of oil will not run dry until the day the Lord sends rain on the land."
Oh, wow. Okay. You see, God is indeed asking for her very last physical resource. But he is not leaving her empty-handed. He is offering her his unfailing, sustaining word in exchange.
That is profound. Okay, so he is asking her to trade her tiny, insufficient reality for his infinite promise.
Exactly.
But she still has to make the choice. That's the miracle of obedience here. She is faced with a terrifying decision. She can cling to her grim reality, keep her tiny handful of flour, feed her son one last time, and then die. Or she can choose to believe the bold promise of a foreign prophet representing a God who isn't even worshipped in her city.
And this is where true faith is forged, isn't it? The scriptures record in verse 15 that she went away and did exactly as Elijah had told her.
Let that sink in for a second.
Seriously, she walked back to her house, she looked at her starving son, she looked at the bottom of the jar, and she chose to place her survival entirely in the hands of God's promise. She acted before the provision was visible.
And that radical, costly obedience immediately unlocked the miraculous provision of heaven. The text says, So there was food every day for Elijah and for the woman and her family. For the jar of flour was not used up and the jug of oil did not run dry.
Day after day.
Exactly as the Lord had promised, in a house right in the heart of pagan, Baal-worshipping territory, a daily, undeniable miracle took up residence.
While a devastating famine ravaged everything outside their door, this destitute widow, her son, and the prophet were sustained.
It's a stunning historical event. The visual of that is just incredible. But as the essay we're discussing points out, this narrative is also carrying an immense theological weight.
It's not just a nice story about God feeding a hungry family.
No, not at all. It's laying down foundational truths about how God operates in the world. Let's unpack that theological weight because the essay really takes its time breaking down these major themes, and I want to make sure we do the same for the listeners. First, there's this incredible concept of sovereign mercy and how it connects to the progressive revelation of God's plan. And the essay points out that centuries later, Jesus actually uses this exact story in a very confrontational way.
Oh, in Luke chapter 4, it's such a brilliant and frankly explosive moment.
Walk us through what happens there.
So Jesus is teaching in the synagogue of his hometown, Nazareth. Initially, the crowd is amazed by him, they're proud, but then they start demanding signs. They want him to perform miracles for them because he's a hometown boy.
They feel entitled to his power.
Exactly, based purely on their shared geography and lineage. And Jesus deliberately brings up this specific widow from Zarephath to dismantle their pride.
He reminds them, right? He says there were many widows in Israel during the severe drought of Elijah's time.
Yes. He says there were plenty of starting Israelites, yet Elijah was not sent to a single one of them. He was bypassed entirely around them and sent only to a Gentile widow in the pagan region of Sidon.
And the crowd in the synagogue, they lose their minds. They are so enraged, they try to throw Jesus off a cliff. I remember reading that and wondering, why such a violent reaction to a history lesson?
Because Christ used this historical fact to prove a theological truth that shattered their entire worldview. He showed them that the grace of God cannot be manipulated, demanded, or hoarded simply on the basis of physical lineage or national identity.
Wow.
The Israelites of Elijah's day had stubbornly embraced idolatry. They wanted Baal. So God essentially said, fine. The Lord reserves the absolute right to pour out his saving power upon those on the outside, upon foreigners and outcasts who actually possess a genuine receptive faith.
Which echoes the profound truth of Romans 9.1 where God declares, I will have mercy on whom I have mercy.
Exactly. Jesus is telling his hometown, God's grace isn't your exclusive property.
And that connects so beautifully to the broader picture of the Bible, this idea of progressive revelation. Under the Mosaic Law, God's redemptive focus was heavily concentrated on the physical land of Canaan, the Levitical priesthood, the temple in Jerusalem.
Right.
The pagan nations surrounding Israel were typically viewed as threats to the purity of the covenant. But right here in 1 Kings, God sends his premier prophet deep into Baal territory to bless a destitute foreigner.
It is a brilliant early glimpse of God's ultimate global purpose.
Yes.
This dusty encounter at the town gate faintly anticipates the current stage we live in today. The gospel was never meant to be permanently contained within the physical boundaries of ancient Israel.
So what we're seeing with this widow is basically a shadow of the work of the Holy Spirit today.
Precisely. Actively calling a diverse, redeemed bride from every tribe, language, and nation on earth, just as Revelation 5.9 describes. It's God proving that his heart has always been for the whole world.
I love that. It's grace flowing freely across borders. Now, let's look at another profound theological layer the essay brings out. We touched on this earlier, but I want to dig deeper into the mechanics of the miracle itself.
The flour and the oil.
Right. Because it serves as the ultimate polemic, the ultimate argument against false gods. Baal was the supposed master of rain. If he was angry, the crops died.
And during this 3.5-year drought, Baal's furious prophets could not produce a single drop of water. They couldn't coax a single blade of grass from the ground to save their own people.
The entire agricultural system of the region had completely collapsed. But notice what the God of Israel does. He doesn't just send a localized secret rainstorm over the widow's house.
Which is what you'd expect, right? I used to wonder that, why didn't God just make it rain on her little patch of garden so she could grow wheat? Why this specific miracle with the jars?
Because bypassing the rain entirely is the point. The mechanics of this miracle are a devastating theological statement. If God just made it rain on her house, the pagans could say, oh, Baal finally blessed this one spot.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
Right, but by multiplying the flour and the oil directly inside the jar, inside the house, Yahweh demonstrates his authority as the supreme creator. He bypasses the agricultural cycle completely. He possesses the power to speak life into existence out of nothing.
Exactly. A truth we see affirmed in Romans 4.1 season. He is sustaining the very atoms of creation right there on her kitchen table. He is proving he is not just a regional deity who depends on favorable weather patterns to feed his people.
He doesn't need rain to make bread.
He is the absolute Lord of the harvest. He can literally provide a table in the wilderness, as Psalm 23 says, and sustain life in the very shadow of death. The statement is unavoidable. Baal is nothing. Yahweh is everything.
And that absolute sovereignty carries us into a fascinating prophetic layer that the essay explores.
Oh, the eschatology part.
Yes, yeah. This narrative casts a striking shadow toward a future stage in God's redemptive plan. The scriptures frequently warn of a coming period of intense global judgment, often referred to in places like Jeremiah 30 as the time of Jacob's trouble.
Right, this is a future time when the nation of Israel will again face severe, unprecedented persecution from a wicked global ruler, the Antichrist. Correct. Just as Elijah, the faithful Jewish prophet, was forced to flee into the wilderness to escape the murderous wrath of Ahab and Jezebel, the scriptures, specifically Revelation 12, indicate a faithful Jewish remnant will one day be forced to flee into the wilderness to escape that future wrath.
And during that terrifying global crisis where people won't be able to buy or sell without a mark, the Lord will again provide supernatural refuge.
Yes.
The essay points out that the scriptures anticipate righteous Gentiles will have a profound opportunity to offer practical, life-saving help to the fleeing people of God.
Which draws such a powerful, illuminating connection to Matthew 25.
The sheep and the goats.
Exactly. Think about that famous passage where Christ describes the future judgment of the nations. He explicitly commends those who fed the hungry, gave water to the thirsty, and clothed the naked.
Yeah.
And he declares that whatever they did for the least of these brothers of mine, they did directly for him.
So how does the widow of Zarephath serve as a prototype here for the listeners?
Well, she is the perfect early picture of those righteous Gentiles. Look at her actions. She recognized the God of Israel. She risked her own meager survival to sustain his persecuted Jewish messenger, and she experienced the miraculous preserving blessing of heaven as a direct result.
Wow.
It perfectly demonstrates the ancient promise made all the way back in Genesis 12.3, where God tells Abraham, I will bless those who bless you.
So those individuals from the nations who risked their own safety to provide food, water, and shelter to the persecuted Jewish remnant during the Great Tribulation will be immensely blessed and rewarded by the returning king.
Just as this widow was blessed for harboring Elijah.
That is a staggering layer of prophetic meaning hidden in this dusty little encounter. But the essay is also very careful to clarify a crucial theological boundary here regarding what it calls covenant literalism and the tension of the kingdom.
Right, because sometimes when people see God blessing a Gentile, they assume he is entirely replacing Israel.
Which we know isn't true. This inclusion of a Gentile believer does not erase God's literal promises to the physical nation of Israel, does it?
No, not at all. And it is vital we understand that. God did not abandon the northern kingdom entirely when he sent Elijah to Sidon. The prophet was miraculously preserved in foreign territory for a very specific purpose, to eventually return to his homeland.
Right. Elijah's mission wasn't over.
He returns in 1 Kings 18 to confront the wicked King Ahab and to call the entire nation to repentance on Mount Carmel so that the rain might finally return to the promised land.
Right. The fire falls from heaven, the people cry out, "The Lord, he is God," and the drought ends. So the Lord's literal promises to preserve, discipline, and ultimately restore the physical nation of Israel remain completely intact.
As the Apostle Paul writes in Romans 11.29, God's gifts and his call are irrevocable.
The grace extended to the widow simply proves that while God remains entirely faithful to his ancient covenants with Israel, his heart of mercy is wide enough to encompass the desperate from every corner of the earth. He's the God of the Jews and the God of the Gentiles.
Exactly. There's that wonderful tension. The essay calls it a tastes now, fullness later expectation.
A tastes now, fullness later expectation. I like that.
Yeah, and we see this tension in the reality of their daily provision. The unending flour and oil were a stunning, immediate taste of the abundant life that God provides. It proved his absolute power to temporarily suspend the curse of scarcity in a fallen world. But we have to remember the context.
Right, because it was a localized miracle. It was happening inside one house. It wasn't the ultimate conclusion of their story.
Exactly.
The widow, her son, and Elijah still woke up every day living under the dark shadow of a wider regional famine. They still walked outside and saw a barren landscape. They still experienced the effects of a broken world. And eventually, despite this miracle, they would all face physical death.
The curse of the fall was suspended inside that jar, but it was not eradicated from the earth.
And this is where the theology really hits our everyday lives. Believers today experience a very similar tension. We experience supernatural sustenance, deep spiritual peace, and sometimes literal, miraculous provision in our present struggles.
God meets our needs.
He does. But we are still living in a broken world. We still get sick. We still experience loss. So we eagerly anticipate a futurist expectation when the curse will be permanently lifted.
We live in the already, but not yet.
Yes. We look forward to the arrival of the new heavens and the new earth, described so beautifully in Revelation 7, a glorious eternal state where hunger and thirst will be completely eradicated forever.
Where God will wipe away every tear.
God provides today, but we long for the day when scarcity is banished for eternity. I love that framework. And, well, this transitions us beautifully into the practical application.
Right, how do we actually live this out?
Exactly. We have explored the history, the gritty narrative, and the deep theology. Now, how does this apply to our everyday life decisions? Let's start with the concept of radical sacrificial obedience. Because the interaction between Elijah and the widow presents a staggering challenge to what we typically call faith.
It forces us to define what faith actually is. Because as we noted, from a purely human perspective, Elijah's request was audacious. He was asking her to act before she saw any evidence of the miracle.
Which means true biblical faith is not just a passive mental agreement with a set of theological facts. It's not just nodding along to a sermon on Sunday morning.
No, it's an active, costly step into the unknown.
The writer of Hebrews tells us that faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. And here is the difficult, abrasive truth of this narrative. Faith frequently requires us to surrender our tight grip on our meager earthly security before we actually see the divine provision materialized.
The widow had to bake the bread and hand it over while the jar was still seemingly empty.
It makes me think of how we operate with our bank accounts or our career plans. We spend so much of our lives desperately trying to build up a safety net, a buffer against ruin.
We want a massive savings account.
We do. And when things get tight, obedience often requires us to scrape the bottom of our earthly security. It is absolutely terrifying to surrender our tight grip on whatever meager resources we have left. We want God to fill the jar while our hands are still closed tightly around it.
We say, God, fill my hands and then I'll be generous. Prove it to me first.
Yes, prove it first. But God says, open your hands, give me what you have, and trust me. The widow had to willingly scrape the bottom of her empty jar and give away her last remnant of hope in order to unlock the miraculous abundance of heaven.
She had to actively trust the character of God more than the terrifying reality of her circumstances. That is radical obedience.
And closely tied to that obedience is a lesson on how to wage spiritual warfare against anxiety. This is so practical for anyone dealing with panic or worry today.
Oh, absolutely.
Look closely at Elijah's method for comforting this terrified woman. When faced with the agonizing reality of starvation, he did not offer her empty platitudes.
He didn't tell her to just look on the bright side or that time heals all wounds. I mean, those things are completely useless when you're staring at an empty pantry.
Because fear has a very specific physiological and spiritual mechanism. Fear naturally focuses our attention squarely on the empty jar and the dry jug.
It creates this intense tunnel vision.
Yes, a tunnel vision that convinces us that ruin is absolutely inevitable. We look at the bank account balance, or we read the medical report, or we dwell on the broken relationship, and the anxiety becomes completely suffocating. All we can see is what we lack.
So how did Elijah counsel her to defeat that anxiety?
Yeah.
Because he did two specific things. First, he commanded her, do not be afraid.
But a command not to fear is useless without an anchor.
Exactly. So he immediately tethered her mind to a specific declared promise from the God of Israel. He redirected her gaze from the empty jar to the word of the Lord.
To defeat suffocating anxiety, we have to deliberately break that tunnel vision. We have to turn our gaze away from our lack and fiercely tether our minds to the unfailing word of the Creator.
When we face economic devastation or health crises, we cannot allow our minds to endlessly loop over the scarcity.
We must anchor our thoughts to the truth of Scripture. We hold on to promises like Paul's assurance in Philippians 4:19 that our God will meet all our needs according to the riches of his glory in Christ Jesus.
We don't deny the reality of the empty jar, but we superimpose the promise of God over it.
That brings us to another incredibly challenging lesson, the posture of daily dependence. And I'll be honest, this is perhaps one of the hardest aspects for modern believers to accept.
It really
We
is.
need to look closely at the specific manner of the miracle. The essay points out something I had never really considered before. God did not drop a massive, overflowing sack of grain into the widow's kitchen.
No, he didn't miraculously fill her entire house with barrels of olive oil so she could, start a bakery.
Right. The text says the jar was not used up and the jug did not run dry. The jar never actually became full. It was just never entirely empty. God provided exactly enough flour and oil for that specific day.
Which means it required the widow, her son, and the prophet to wake up every single morning, look at an almost empty jar, and actively trust heaven for their daily bread.
Literally, just as Jesus taught us to pray, give us today our daily bread, but human nature violently rebels against this.
Oh, yeah.
Why do we always beg the Lord for a massive surplus, a spiritual or financial savings account, rather than a daily allowance?
Because we deeply prefer the illusion of self-sufficiency over the vulnerability of faith. Let's be honest, if we have a massive surplus, we feel like we don't need to depend on God tomorrow.
We want the comfort of knowing we have enough stored up so we can finally stop trusting, so we can relax.
But God frequently ordains a measured daily provision in our lives, specifically to keep us in a posture of intimate, constant reliance upon His sustaining grace.
He wants a daily, ongoing relationship of trust with you, not an independent contractor arrangement where he pays you a lump sum and you don't speak for a year.
That is a deeply convicting truth. Living spiritual paycheck to paycheck isn't God punishing us, it's God keeping us close.
He gives us enough light for the next step, enough grace for the current trial, just enough flour for today's bread.
Wow.
And the final spiritual lesson drawn from this essay is about cultivating a heart for the marginalized. This entire narrative is a blaring reminder of God's enduring, compassionate heart for the severely marginalized and the deeply forgotten.
We live in a society, and sometimes even a church culture, that idolizes power, wealth, influence, and status. We want to reach the movers and the shakers.
But look at the Lord's strategy here. He deliberately bypassed the royal palaces of Israel. He bypassed the wealthy elite. He chose to display his most glorious sustaining power in the dusty, impoverished kitchen of a destitute foreign widow.
Reminds me of 1 Corinthians 1, where Paul says that God routinely chooses the foolish, the weak, and the despised things of this world to shame the strong.
And to ensure that no human being can boast in his presence.
This presents a direct, unavoidable challenge to us. Our priorities must align with the priorities of heaven. If God's heart is so visibly drawn to the broken, the destitute, and the outsider, ours must be as well.
We are called to look past the superficial markers of earthly success. We must actively pursue the vulnerable, the impoverished, and the brokenhearted in our own communities.
We need to realize that the most profound miracles of grace frequently occur among those who have absolutely nothing left to offer.
God is not looking for our capability. He is looking for our availability and our desperate reliance on him.
So as we pull all these threads together, the history, the narrative, the theology, and the application, what does this all mean for the thoughtful believer who is navigating a difficult season today?
It brings us to a final, provocative thought for you to mull over. The dramatic, dusty encounter at the Tarn Gate of Zarephath is a magnificent testament to the relentless, boundary-breaking nature of divine grace.
A hunted prophet and a starving widow brought together by the providential hand of God.
And the overarching message is simply this: absolute ruin is never the final word when the Creator chooses to speak. Whether we look back to the dusty jars in ancient Sidon or look forward to the magnificent provision he will supply for his people in the darkest days of the future tribulation, the character of our provider remains completely unchanged.
He is the God who delights to save the marginalized, who sustains his servants in the wilderness, and whose grace flows freely to anyone willing to trust his unfailing word.
When we possess the courage to scrape the bottom of our own jars and trust God's unfailing word, his faithful provision will never run dry.
That's a powerful truth to stand on.
I want to leave you with the closing scripture exactly as it appears at the end of the essay. Listen to the simplicity and the profound weight of this obedience and provision. From 1 Kings 17:17.14-16. She went away and did as Elijah had told her. So there was food every day for Elijah and for the woman and her family. For the jar of flour was not used up, and the jug of oil did not run dry, in keeping with the word of the Lord spoken by Elijah.
May the Lord bless you with deep peace and unwavering faith in whatever season of scarcity you might be facing right now. May He grant you the courage to trust His word even when the jar looks terrifyingly empty, and may you experience His daily sustaining grace in your life.
May God provide your daily sustenance, keep your mind fiercely tethered to His promises, and assure you that His grace truly flows freely. Thank you for taking this deep dive with us. Trust the word of the Lord and go in peace.